You know that feeling? That slow, burning fuse of pure, unadulterated petty rage that starts somewhere near your solar plexus and climbs, heat-seeking missile style, right into the most vengeful part of your brain? Yeah, I was riding that particular wave when the registered letter arrived. It wasn't a bomb threat, though it felt like one. It was worse. It was a formal, 6-page, double-spaced, perfectly italicized cease and desist letter regarding my dog's excessive and egregious noise pollution. I stood there in my kitchen, holding this absurdly official document that probably cost someone $80 just to print. And I laughed. It wasn't a hearty, joyful laugh. It was the tight, manic kind that promises swift, disproportionate retaliation. Tank, my perfectly sweet, slightly too large for the couch mutt, looked up at me with those huge brown eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 belly rubs, clearly asking, "What fresh hell has the two-legged menace unleashed now?" The letter was from the neighborhood HOA, but everyone knew who was pulling the strings. Karen, 2 houses down. The woman who considered an unmown lawn a personal affront to her perfectly organized universe. The letter cited Ordinance 34.b, Subdivision 12, regarding duration, decibel level, and subjective annoyance index of unsanctioned canine vocalizations. I swear, the HOA meetings must be held in a library after drinking 3 pots of coffee. What was the incident? I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was Tuesday, 3:15 p.m. Tank was enjoying a sun bath on the back deck, a moment of pure canine serenity, which, in our suburban development, is apparently a punishable offense. A squirrel, a particularly cheeky specimen with a Napoleon complex, decided to stand on the fence and aggressively chatter at Tank. Tank, being a dog and therefore programmed to respond to existential threats, like squirrels, gave one single, definitive woof. It was less a bark, more an exclamatory statement. "Excuse me, sir, that is my property!" A full second of noise. 1 second. But in the manicured, sterile world that Karen policed, that 1 second was an atomic event. I remember looking out the window right after, just in time to see her pause her perfectly timed, rotating sprinklers. Seriously, she times them with a stopwatch, and turn her head. Her expression was a magnificent display of aristocratic disgust, like she'd just smelled a fish that was 4 days past its prime. She didn't yell. She didn't wave. She just glared at my dog with a level of hatred usually reserved for tax auditors and the inventor of the air horn. And now, here I was, reading a section that threatened a $500 fine, and I quote, "possible court-ordered rehoming of the offending animal if the issue was not immediately and permanently rectified." Rehoming? My Tank? The sweetest, most loving creature on this side of the Mississippi, who only barks when he believes the postal carrier is actively trying to assassinate us? This wasn't about noise. This was about power. This was about Karen's unshakable belief that she was the queen of quiet suburbia, and I, Leo Maxwell, the hapless WFH guy in the blue house, was simply a peasant whose dog dared to make an unauthorized sound. The fire in my belly wasn't just burning now. It was an inferno. I looked at the letter, then at Tank, then out the window at Karen's ridiculously green lawn. A lawn that looked less like grass and more like industrial-grade green velvet. It was perfect. Too perfect. It needed something. It needed consequences. It needed a life lesson delivered with the subtlety of a freight train and the official endorsement of the municipal police force. The petty rage was morphing into glorious, beautiful inspiration. I knew what I had to do. I needed to inflict a proportionate, yet absolutely devastating act of legal, financial, and auditory revenge. The stage was set, the villain had made her move, and the protagonist, me, was about to unleash a plot so absurdly perfect it could only be funded by pure spite. I crumpled the letter into a tiny ball. Game on, Karen. Game on. The first step was, of course, the initial confrontation. I decided to head over there myself, armed with a lukewarm cup of coffee and an Oscar-worthy performance of wide-eyed innocence. I needed to gauge the depth of the insanity I was fighting. I walked the 2 houses down. Karen's house was a blinding shade of beige with the white picket fence. Unnecessary, as I mentioned, but she loved a boundary. I knocked gently. She opened the door, dressed in a crisply ironed denim shirt and khakis, looking like she was about to judge a yacht competition. "Leo," she said, her voice dripping with the fake sweet condescension of someone who just realized you don't belong in her VIP section. "I trust you received the official communication." "I did, Karen, thank you. Very thorough. I particularly enjoyed the italicized Latin phrases, really added a layer of gravitas to the accusation that my dog, Tank, is a menace to society." She ignored my sarcasm, adjusting her non-prescription reading glasses. "It is not a joke, Leo. That dog's incessant barking is destroying the tranquility of the neighborhood. Yesterday, I heard him again. At least 3 distinct outbursts." 3? I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, the only noise Tank made yesterday was a quiet groan when he realized I was out of cheddar dog biscuits. The only thing destroying the tranquility around here is the HOA's budget on fancy lawyers." She stepped forward, adopting a severe, arms-crossed posture. "The rule is simple. Excessive noise. Your dog is loud, Leo. His vocal presence is impacting property values and, frankly, my constitution. I have a very sensitive nervous system." "Ma'am," I countered, trying to keep a straight face, "the noise ordinance measures duration, not the decibels of a single. Isolated exclamatory sound. He barked once at a squirrel. Once. If we start fining people for reacting to nature, we'll need to fine your automated leaf blower for running at 7 a.m. on a Sunday." She bristled, her lips thinning into a dangerous white line. "If you cannot control your animal, I will pursue the fines and I will get the court order. I'm giving you a warning. Control your dog or face the consequences." She slammed the door before I could respond. It was perfect. She was immovable. She was confident. And she had just confirmed that her single focus was my humiliation and Tank's removal. This meant my revenge needed to be completely legal, undeniably disruptive, and focused solely on her sacred ground, her perfect lawn. Later that afternoon, staring blankly at my laptop, I saw an advertisement pop up for a local police K-9 unit fundraiser. They needed new training equipment. And then, the idea struck. It was so simple, so beautiful, and so utterly destructive to Karen's peace that I almost choked on my coffee. Police dogs. I immediately picked up the phone and dialed the local precinct's non-emergency line. The woman who answered sounded like she was reading from a script written in the 1950s. "City of Harmony Oaks Police Department. How may I direct your call?" "Hi. Yes, I need to speak to someone about a substantial, no-strings-attached donation to the K-9 unit, like 5 figures." There was a long, awkward pause. I could practically hear the dispatcher, Officer Henderson, flipping through a manual that didn't cover this situation. "Sir, are you reporting an incident involving canines, or are you looking to finance a public service?" I'm looking to finance a public service in a very specific, tactical way. Hold, please. I waited for 10 minutes, listening to the hold music, a truly awful jazz flute solo, before a deep, gravelly voice came on the line. "This is Captain Miller. Officer Henderson says you have a proposition about the K-9 fund?" "Captain Miller, thank you for taking my call. My name is Leo Maxwell. I'm a local resident. I love what you guys do. I'm prepared to donate $10,000 immediately to your K-9 training fund." Silence. Then a skeptical sigh. "Mr. Maxwell, donations usually go through the city finance office, and $10,000 is a lot. What's the catch?" "No catch, Captain. Just one tiny request. See, I've been reading up on police dog training, and I understand they need diverse environments, right? Different scents, different terrains, high traffic versus quiet residential zones." "That's correct. They need to be adaptable." "Excellent. Well, I know a spot. A beautiful, pristine, completely level patch of land in my neighborhood. The kind of place you just know is perfect for agility drills and scent tracking. It's got excellent sight lines, virtually no traffic, and the lawn is maintained to, frankly, an obsessive degree." "And where is this ideal training spot, Mr. Maxwell?" "It's a lawn at 442 Maple Lane. It's 2 doors down from me. I'm at 438. The owner is very detail-oriented. The training would be a huge service to the community. And look, I'm just suggesting a temporary training rotation, say 2 weeks, just a few hours a day. You get $10,000 for new vests, and your dogs get a perfectly controlled, high-value training environment." Captain Miller cleared his throat. I could feel him processing the absurdity. "Mr. Maxwell, are you implying that the owner of 442 Maple Lane is aware of and approves of this temporary training rotation?" "Captain," I said, laying it on thick, "I'm sure once she understands the civic duty involved and the immense value of training our brave K-9 officers on her property, she will be thrilled. Absolutely thrilled. After all, what's more important than community safety? It's not like she uses the front yard for anything other than displaying her award-winning petunias. It's simply going to be a temporary, tax-deductible disruption to her life." I held my breath. If the captain said no, my entire plot for beautiful, magnificent revenge would crumble. "Mr. Maxwell," Captain Miller finally said, the skepticism replaced by a note of cautious curiosity, "I can't promise anything, but a $10,000 donation is significant. If the donation is legally sound and truly without official strings attached, and if the property is determined to be a suitable public training space, I see no official policy issue with utilizing it. I'll send Lieutenant Ramirez to meet you tomorrow to inspect your preferred training location. Be ready to prove you have $10,000 burning a hole in your pocket." I hung up, adrenaline coursing through me. I was 2,500 words in, and the ball was rolling. Karen had no idea that her petty complaint about one bark was about to unleash a dozen heavily trained, loud, and lawn-destroying police dogs onto her precious, pristine suburban masterpiece. And the best part? It was all completely legal, and technically for a good cause. Lieutenant Ramirez showed up the next morning. He was a young guy, sharp, wearing impeccably pressed uniform pants that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. I handed him the certified check. His eyes went wide. "Mr. Maxwell, this is extremely generous, but I still don't understand why the specific address 2 doors down." I leaned in, giving him my best conspiratorial wink. "Lieutenant, every cop knows that the most effective training happens where you're least expected. This location is a perfectly manicured, high-visibility, zero-clutter zone. It's a tactical gold mine. Plus, and this is just between us." I lowered my voice to a theatrical whisper. The owner is a real piece of work. Maybe a little civic disruption will do her good. Ramirez just shook his head, a slight smile playing on his lips. Okay, Mr. Maxwell, I'll draft the utilization agreement. 2 weeks, 3 hours a day, starting Monday, but we need a clear perimeter. That was my cue for Phase 2. The setup. I couldn't just have the cops show up. Karen would see the squad cars and think it was a mistake. I needed infrastructure. I needed the lawn to look like a legitimate, government-sanctioned construction zone of mayhem. I needed a contractor who asked no questions and charged high prices. I found them. The Mowers of Mayhem, a landscaping and light construction crew run by a guy named Boris, whose neck was thicker than my thigh, and whose skepticism was legendary. I called Boris and arranged a meeting on Karen's curb. So, Mr. Maxwell, Boris grunted, adjusting his baseball cap, you want us to install what exactly? A temporary, non-permanent, government-grade perimeter fence, along with some ground-level sensor pads, across your neighbor's front lawn, but without telling the neighbor. Precisely, I said, nodding seriously. It's a preliminary geodetic survey for municipal canine performance metrics. I pulled the jargon straight out of the HOA's letter. Boris squinted at me. Look, I've installed fences for hoarders, I've put in koi ponds that cost more than a Honda, and I've rebuilt a shed after a homeowners association meeting turned into a riot. But this is new level weird. What is a geodetic survey? It means the cops want to make sure the ground is level enough for their dogs to run on. We need to measure the tensile strength of the soil, ensuring the grass is cut to a police-mandated height, say 2.5 inches. And then we set up these official-looking, very vague training area, unauthorized access prohibited signs. They need to be authoritative, Boris. Like, don't even think about standing here authoritative. Boris ran a hand over his shaved head. $5,000 for the materials and labor, cash up front. And I don't want to hear about no neighbor complaints. You handle the crazy, I handle the measurements. Deal, I said, handing him the cash. The cost was mounting, but the value of the impending psychological warfare was priceless. The next morning, Boris and his crew descended on Maple Lane. They arrived in a dump truck that smelled faintly of diesel and old pizza. Karen was, predictably, pruning a rose bush. She stopped dead when she saw Boris and his crew unloading survey equipment and what looked suspiciously like pieces of orange police netting. She marched over, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. "What in God's name is going on here?" she demanded, looking at Boris. Boris, who clearly dealt with people like Karen for a living, just pointed a massive finger at me, standing 2 doors down, pretending to water my petunias. Karen pivoted and stormed toward my yard. "Leo, what is this monstrosity? Why are there construction workers on my property?" I turned slowly, adopting a look of deep concern. "Karen, I wish I knew. I saw them pull up this morning. I think it's the city. They seem to be installing a preliminary perimeter for a very sensitive municipal project." "What municipal project? I haven't received any notice." "Well, you know how these things are. Government bureaucracy. I overheard something about a geodetic survey and tactical deployment training. Apparently, your lawn is the only one in the entire subdivision that meets the specific coefficient of friction required for the equipment. They seemed pretty serious. Something about national security." I lowered my voice again. "I mean, look at those signs. Unauthorized access prohibited. I wouldn't mess with it, Karen. It looks official." She glanced back at the signs Boris was now staking firmly into her perfect grass. They were black text on a reflective yellow background. Absolutely menacing. The phrase "unauthorized access prohibited" was printed in all caps and looked alarmingly real, despite being completely fabricated by Boris's printer. Karen looked like she was going to spontaneously combust. "But my petunias, my water schedule, I have a pristine lawn." I know, I said, shaking my head with fake sympathy. "It's a sacrifice we all have to make for community safety. Maybe they'll just be measuring. Just be glad they're not bringing the heavy equipment." I escaped back inside, leaving her to hover over Boris's crew, demanding proof of municipal credentials, which Boris calmly ignored by simply grunting and laying down more orange netting. It was glorious. The final setup was the formal agreement. I met Captain Miller at the precinct later that afternoon. He was all business. "Mr. Maxwell, the check cleared. The K9 unit is grateful. We have the utilization agreement here. It clearly states the training will occur at 442 Maple Lane, limited to 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., Monday through Friday for 10 business days. We will use specific, non-destructive agility equipment and naturally clean up any biological byproducts. Are you sure you're okay with all this?" "Captain," I said, pushing the document across the desk, "I'm thrilled. Think of this as my community service. And just to be clear, the $10,000 donation is a gift. There is no contractual obligation for you to continue training at that location after the 10 days. It's just an initial, highly suggested venue." He stared at the signed document, then at me. He was a professional. He knew something deeply weird was happening, but he had $10,000 in hand and a perfectly legal training venue. He signed the agreement. As I walked out, I saw Lieutenant Ramirez loading a crate marked K9 Training Supplies into a truck. It included what looked like a giant plastic crawl tunnel and several very intimidating chew-proof ropes. I smiled. Monday was going to be the greatest day of my life. I had turned my neighbor's petty tyranny into a $10,000 police-sanctioned act of maximum annoyance. The suspense that Sunday night was agonizing. I was up at 5 o'clock a.m. Monday, feeling like a kid waiting for Santa, only Santa was bringing a squad of highly trained, loud, working-class dogs and their handlers to ruin a perfectly good suburban lawn. I made a huge mug of coffee and found the perfect viewing spot. My own front porch swing, positioned for maximum visibility of 442 Maple Lane. Tank, sensing my excitement, was sitting at my feet, his tail thumping against the wood. At precisely 8:50 a.m., I saw Karen. She was already outside, armed with a trowel, inspecting the official-looking orange netting Boris had installed. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and looked furious. I could practically hear her internal monologue about the audacity of the municipal government. Then, at 8:58 a.m., it began. First, a single, official-looking black-and-white SUV turned onto Maple Lane. Then another, and another. Soon, a caravan of 6 police vehicles, 4 SUVs, and 2 official K9 transport vans was slowly making its way down the street. The lead car, an SUV with Captain Miller behind the wheel, pulled right up to Karen's curb. They weren't discreet. They were official. And for about 5 wonderful, glorious seconds, they blasted a high-pitched siren chirp just to announce their presence. The neighborhood was instantly awake. Blinds went up. Doors cracked open. Kids pressed their noses to windows. And Karen? She stood in the middle of her driveway, trowel in hand, looking like a very upset garden gnome. The doors opened simultaneously. outpoured 6 handlers and 6 of the most magnificent, focused German Shepherds and Malinois you've ever seen. These were not suburban pets. These were focused, professional, loud workers. The air instantly filled with the smells of leather, dog sweat, and professional police-grade authority. The first sound was beautiful. It was the synchronized, aggressive, serious woof of half a dozen police dogs being let out of their crates. Tank, bless his heart, whimpered in awe and slight fear. "These guys mean business," his eyes said. Captain Miller, looking immensely uncomfortable but doing his duty, approached Karen, who was trembling with indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, pointing her trowel at a German shepherd named Sarge, who was already sniffing her prized neon-yellow marigolds. "You are on private property. This is trespassing. I'm calling the chief." Captain Miller, who seemed to be genuinely enjoying the awkwardness, stood firm. "Ma'am, this is an official City of Harmony Oaks Police K-9 training exercise, sanctioned by the department. We have a temporary utilization agreement for this parcel of land." "A utilization agreement? I never signed anything. I never consented." "That may be true, ma'am," the captain said calmly, holding up the clipboard with the signed document. "But we secured the agreement through the generous public donation of your neighbor, Mr. Leo Maxwell of 438 Maple Lane. He specifically suggested this location for its suitability for our agility and scent work drills. Since the donation was made with the intent of public service, and the property is legally designated as a temporary training perimeter, we are fully within our rights to utilize the space." I lifted my coffee cup in a silent, slow-motion salute from my porch. "I'm sorry, Karen. I can't hear you over the sound of justice." Karen swiveled her head and pointed a trembling finger right at me. "You! You did this!" "Did what, Karen?" I yelled back, adopting a tone of injured innocence. "I simply donated money to the police to thank them for their service. They picked the spot. I guess they just love your landscaping skills." "But the barking, she wailed, as 3 massive shepherds, running agility drills, barked a synchronized, earth-shattering series of commands. They were the symphony of my revenge. "It's not excessive and egregious noise pollution, ma'am," Captain Miller interjected, deadpan. "It's federally sanctioned professional canine vocalization. It's part of the training protocol. Any interference could be construed as obstruction of official police activity." Karen looked defeated. Sarge, the aforementioned German shepherd, was now aggressively tracking a scent trail, likely Captain Miller's missing car keys, right through the heart of her prize petunia bed. A young handler was setting up a low, hurdle-like obstacle that looked suspiciously like her white picket fence section. The rest of the morning was a chaotic ballet of justice. The handlers ran drills across the lawn, shouting commands like "find" and "bite," which were just for training the protective gear, thankfully. The dogs bounded, they barked, they dug tiny, focused holes while tracking imaginary contraband, and they executed high-energy takedowns on padded decoys, all on Karen's pristine green velvet. The noise was constant, official, and utterly glorious. I spent the next 2 hours on my porch, enjoying the show. Neighbors started coming out, not to complain, but to take pictures. One guy from across the street came over and handed me a 6-pack of craft beer. "Leo," he whispered, "I've been waiting 10 years for someone to do this. She fined my wife $100 because our mailbox paint was too glossy. You're a legend." The climax of the day came when one of the scent-tracking dogs, an enthusiastic Malinois named Chaos, apparently followed a scent right to Karen's garden hose, which he proceeded to vigorously apprehend while barking his head off. The handler gently disengaged him, but the message was clear. There was no safe zone, not even for the water source used to maintain the zone. Perfect lawn. By the time the unit packed up at noon, Karen's lawn looked less like a suburban oasis and more like a very brief, high-intensity military training camp. There were temporary divots, faint tracks, and a lingering scent of proud, working dog. She stood behind her now-closed blinds, watching the final, slow-motion departure of the police caravan. My cup was empty, my heart was full, and the 10,000 us had never felt better spent. The training continued for the full 10 business days. Every morning at 8:58 a.m., the sirens would briefly chirp, the doors would open, and the sweet, sweet sound of official police dog barking would erupt onto Maple Lane. Karen's behavior became legendary. She didn't come outside. She didn't leave her house. She became a prisoner of her own petty war. She ran her sprinklers only after 12:05 p.m. She ordered groceries delivered. She became the ghost in her own beige mansion. The rest of the neighborhood, however, embraced the change. They were openly supportive of me, Leo, the guy who finally stood up to the neighborhood menace with a stroke of financial genius and utter, glorious spite. I started getting notes tucked into my mailbox. Gift cards, bottles of wine, and even a thank you note from the guy who was fined for having 2 gnome statues instead of the sanctioned one. On the final Friday, Captain Miller approached my porch swing again, his uniform impeccable, his face stern but with a hint of a smile. "Mr. Maxwell, the 10 business days are complete. The K9 unit got excellent training. We have a few new certification scores thanks to the diversity of the terrain. The trainers reported high efficiency and no civilian interference. We are immensely grateful for the donation." "It was my pleasure, Captain. A pleasure, indeed." "I do have to ask," he said, leaning in. "Was this entirely about the training, or did it have something to do with the owner of 442 Maple Lane?" I held up my empty coffee mug. "Captain, I simply believe in supporting our local services. I like loud official noises, and I value community safety. If a few flower beds had to be temporarily repurposed for the greater good, well, that's the price of a secure neighborhood, wouldn't you say?" He nodded slowly. "I suppose so. Well, we're out. We'll be sure to rotate to another location soon. Thank you, Mr. Maxwell." "Thank you, Captain." As the last K9 van pulled away, taking the scent of official purpose and focused German Shepherd with it, a profound silence descended upon Maple Lane. The grass on 442 was definitely flattened in spots. There was a conspicuous area where the petunias had met their end beneath the paws of a scent-tracking drill. But remarkably, the lawn was still mostly green. The police, sticklers for protocol, had been meticulous in their mandated cleanup. I walked over to the curb and surveyed the scene. The orange netting was gone. The intimidating signs were removed. All that remained was the psychological scarring and the memory of 6 police dogs using Karen's property as a jungle gym. I went back to my porch and sat down next to Tank, who was now snoozing quietly under a sunbeam. He stretched luxuriously, utterly content. "You earned that nap, buddy," I told him, scratching him behind the ears. "You barked once, and you nearly got us evicted. But you also launched a successful, completely legal counteroffensive that cost me $10,000, earned me a 6-pack, and gave an entire neighborhood 2 weeks of satisfying, petty revenge." I looked over at Karen's house. The blinds were still firmly shut. She wouldn't emerge for days, maybe weeks. The victory was complete. She had learned that in the suburban trenches, if you come at the king, you best not miss. And you definitely shouldn't mess with a man's dog. The lesson was learned, the ledger was balanced, and the silence was magnificent. Now, I thought, sipping the last of my cold coffee, what's the municipal code on adopting a goat? It's probably time to diversify my portfolio of neighborly nuisances.